They laughed as they shaved her head, not knowing her face already hung on their wall. The office echoed with cruel laughter as the young intern stood still, surrounded by a circle of mocking co-workers. A man held electric clippers buzzing loudly as half of her long black hair fell to the floor. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared ahead, her eyes empty. Not far behind them, mounted on the wall, hung a polished portrait of a smiling girl. The same eyes, the same face. Below it, a golden plaque read, "Sweet family, missing since years." They didn't recognize her, but they would. At the heart of downtown Des Moines stood the towering glass building of Sweet Enterprises. From the outside, it looked like a symbol of success. Clean walls, shiny doors, and a logo that meant wealth. But inside, hidden in the corners and back hallways, was a different story. That's where Elena worked. Elena moved quietly, almost like a ghost. She was barely noticed, except when someone needed to complain. Dressed in second-hand clothes, her shoes were worn thin at the soles. One had a tiny rip across the side. Most people wouldn't look twice at her unless it was to wrinkle their noses. The other interns never spoke to her unless it was to mock her. Her silence made them uncomfortable. Her poverty made them cruel. During lunch breaks, they sat together, laughing about their nights out, while Elena sat alone in the back eating leftovers from a plastic bag. When she walked past, whispers followed. "Do you smell that? She wears that same dress every week. Is she even allowed up here?" She said nothing. Always nothing. Elena worked hard scrubbing floors, wiping windows, and emptying trash cans. But there was one job she insisted on doing herself, no matter what. Every morning before anyone arrived, she polished the large glass frame in the main hallway. It held a single photo, a professional portrait of a rich-looking family, a man in a sharp suit, a woman with soft eyes, and a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a sky-blue dress and a big smile. A small gold plate under the photo read, "Sweet family, missing since years." Most people walked past that frame without noticing it. Some had even forgotten who they were. The founders of the company, gone after a tragic plane crash years ago. The Sweet family had disappeared. No bodies were found. Just loss, mystery, and eventually silence. The business was taken over by trustees, and life moved on, but not for Elena. Each morning, she wiped every fingerprint off that glass with care. Her fingers traced the outlines of the faces, especially the little girl, her eyes, her nose. It was like looking into a memory she couldn't fully remember. Something deep in her chest always stirred. A pull, a whisper, like a story that had been erased but wasn't quite gone. Elena didn't know why she was drawn to that photo. She didn't even understand the strange weight in her chest when she stared at the little girl's smile. But it made her feel something she couldn't explain. Not just sadness, something closer to longing. She never told anyone. They'd just laugh. Like they always did. One afternoon, as she was cleaning the glass again, a group of employees passed behind her. They rolled their eyes. One of them scoffed, "She acts like she owns the place." Another one chuckled. Maybe she thinks she's their lost maid or something. Their laughter echoed down the hall as they walked away. Elena didn't move. She just pressed her hand flat against the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, half-shadowed over the face of the little girl in the photo. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I know you." But the moment passed. The rest of the day went on like any other. She returned to her cleaning cart, checked off her checklist, and kept to the edges of every room like she always did. The framed photo stayed behind her, spotless as ever, glowing faintly under the hallway lights. To everyone else, it was just an old memory, a symbol of a family lost, a cold piece of corporate history. To Elena, it was more. It had to be. Every day she stood in front of it, The feeling grew that she didn't just belong in this building, that she had a reason to be here. One that went far deeper than a mop and a uniform, and soon the truth she couldn't yet see would come rising from the past, unstoppable. But that glass wasn't the only thing about to shatter. Years before Elena walked the halls of Sweet Enterprises with a mop and tired eyes, the world had already buried the family that built it. The Sweet family was once a household name across Iowa. Charles and Isabella Sweet, founders of the billion-dollar company, were known not just for their wealth, but for their warmth. They were the kind of rich people who gave back, hosting food drives, funding schools, even donating shoes to orphanages. Their family photo was printed in magazines, always showing them with their daughter, a little girl with black hair, soft cheeks, and a blue dress that matched her eyes. Then, one day, everything changed. Their private jet vanished over the mountains of Colorado during a storm. No distress call, no wreckage, just gone. For weeks, search teams combed the area. They found a few scraps of metal, but no bodies. Eventually, the news settled on a simple truth. The Sweet family was presumed dead. The company didn't collapse. It shifted. A board of trustees stepped in, acting as caretakers of the empire until an heir could be found. But years passed. The headlines faded. The plaque, "Missing Since Years," became just another part of the office decor. No one expected them back. Most people didn't even remember their names. But inside Elena's mind, memories didn't vanish. They slept, curled up in dusty corners, waiting to wake. She didn't know why some nights brought dreams that felt too real. Dreams of a large white mansion with marble floors and sunlight pouring through long curtains. A soft voice would sing lullabies, and Elena would see the silhouette of a woman brushing her hair, a voice like home. In other flashes, there was fear, running through a forest, screams, a crash, blood on a teddy bear's ear. Then silence. She'd wake up in her small apartment, sweating and confused, sometimes crying without knowing why. Elena's foster records were clear. She was found at the age of 6, alone at a rest stop just outside Sioux City. She had no ID, no known family, and spoke little. A note had been pinned to her shirt with only 2 words: "Keep safe." She was placed into foster care. Passed. From home to home, never staying too long. No one claimed her. And eventually, she stopped asking why. It wasn't until she turned 18 that she started looking for jobs. One of the listings read, "Sweet Enterprises Internship Program, Des Moines HQ." The name felt oddly familiar, like a song she couldn't remember but knew she'd once heard. She took the job, not knowing that the building she cleaned every day had once been her playground. That the polished tiles had once echoed with her laughter. Now, the same board that had once promised to protect the company was living in wealth and comfort. The trustees traveled in private jets, drove luxury cars, and hosted expensive charity events. They spoke of honoring the Sweet legacy, but lived as if the heirs were never coming back. In quiet corners, they'd joke about the old photo in the hall. "Poor girl, probably shark food," one trustee once said during a holiday party, not knowing that the poor girl was pushing a mop just 2 floors below them. Elena watched them from a distance. She didn't understand the pull she felt toward the framed family portrait, but it grew stronger every day. The woman in the photo looked like the lullaby voice in her dreams. The man's smile stirred a strange ache in her heart. And the little girl. Sometimes she'd stand in front of the picture, for minutes lost in it. Security would sometimes ask her to move along, and she'd quietly obey, returning to her janitor's cart without protest. But the questions didn't go away. Why did she remember that blue dress? Why did that woman's face feel like love? Why did the photo feel like it belonged to her? The world thought the Sweet bloodline was gone, buried in the snow, lost in the clouds. But one piece of it had survived, hiding in plain sight, forgotten by paperwork, overlooked by power. She didn't know yet who she really was. But fate did, and yet the bloodline they'd buried still walked these halls. It started like every other break. The top-floor interns and office staff gathered near the open-plan lounge, laughing too loudly, sipping overpriced coffee, and gossiping about weekend plans. Elena walked past them with her cleaning cart, head down, moving quickly like always. She knew the rules: stay invisible, don't interrupt, and never draw attention. But that day, something was different. One of the interns, a tall guy named Drew, leaned in and whispered something to Jordan, the office manager. Jordan turned his head, smirking, and glanced toward Elena. She didn't hear what was said, but she felt it. That sudden shift in the air when a room turns against you. Someone tripped her. Not hard, just enough to knock her off balance. Her cleaning supplies clattered to the floor. Laughter followed. Phones were already out. Some were pretending to help, but mostly they were filming. Elena quickly scrambled to pick up her things. She didn't make eye contact. She never did. "Hey, Elena," Jordan called out, voice full of fake charm. "You ever consider a makeover? You might blend in better." A few chuckles rose from the crowd. Elena froze. Her hands trembled as she clutched the mop. She said nothing. "That hair," Jordan continued, waving toward her. "It's a bit tired. It might be time for something fresh. You know, company standards." Drew pulled something out of his bag with a dramatic gesture, a set of cordless clippers. The buzzing sound cracked through the hall like an alarm. People gasped, then laughed. "Let's give her the executive cut," someone shouted. It all happened so fast. Before she could react, Jordan stepped forward, clipped the back of her long black hair, and laughed as strands floated to the floor. A woman cheered. Someone clapped. The phones kept filming. Elena stood there, stunned. Her arms stayed limp at her sides. Her eyes didn't blink. She looked straight ahead, but at nothing. The room spun with noise, laughter, whispers, screens, glowing. She didn't fight back. She didn't scream. She just stood still, like a statue, as more of her hair fell in clumps around her feet. The sound of the clippers buzzed louder in her ears than the mocking voices, and right behind the crowd, above the commotion and cruelty, hung the framed photo. The Sweet family portrait, lit by a soft hallway light. The smiling child in the picture wore the same eyes, the same long dark hair that now lay on the marble floor. But no one looked at it. They were too busy laughing. Eventually, Jordan stepped, back, chuckling to himself. "There, that's better," he said, shaking the clippers like a trophy. Elena turned and walked away without a word. Her shoulders didn't shake. Her feet didn't rush. She didn't even cover her head. She simply walked past them, face blank, eyes hollow, as if none of them existed, and none of them followed her. Not one person stepped forward to stop it. Not one voice said enough. Later that evening, long after the offices had emptied, Elena returned to the hallway. She stood in front of the Sweet family portrait, half her hair gone, her scalp raw with cold air. The glass was smudged, the only day she hadn't cleaned it. Her eyes locked on the little girl in the photo, and for the first time, she looked closely. Same eyes, same lips, the same soft arch in the eyebrows, same mole on the cheek. One Elena had always hidden under her hair. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer. Her fingers trembled as she touched the glass. It wasn't a coincidence. It was her. She was the girl in the photo. She was the missing child of the Sweet family. The memory didn't hit all at once. It came in flashes. A woman's perfume. A silver bracelet. A plain seatbelt clicking. Screams. A sudden drop. Her mother's voice panicked. "If anything happens, protect her." Then darkness. Elena stumbled back, heart racing. She wasn't just some poor janitor. She wasn't just a nobody left behind in foster care. She was Elena Sweet, the hidden heir of the company. The blood in her veins was the same as that which built the glass tower. All those people who laughed, they worked for her. They just didn't know it yet. And neither did she. Until now. She looked once more at the photo, her reflection merging with the image of the smiling child. Behind the glass, her lips parted. Her voice shook, but it came out strong. I remember, in that moment, something inside her shifted. Not anger, not revenge, but purpose. The world had forgotten her. The company had erased her. The trustees had grown fat off the legacy they promised to protect. But the truth had survived. Hidden, bruised, but alive. And now that truth had eyes. They cut her hair, but they couldn't cut away the truth. The building was silent after dark. Most of the lights had shut off, leaving only the low hum of vending machines and the distant buzz of an overnight printer. Elena stood alone in the empty hallway outside the locked archive room, a heavy, wooden door with a silver badge that read, "Authorized access only." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small brass key. She had found it 2 weeks earlier, tucked inside the lining of an old coat she'd bought from a thrift store. She didn't think much of it then. But something had told her not to throw it away. Now, standing in the dim light with half her hair shaved and a storm brewing in her chest, that key felt heavier than ever. She slid it into the lock. Click. The door opened. Inside, the room smelled of dust and forgotten time. Faint light. From the hallway spilled over boxes stacked high. Some labeled, most not. The air was thick, untouched. Elena stepped carefully through the room, running her fingers along the old labels. Legal files, payroll archives, blueprints. Nothing useful. Then, on a shelf pushed far into the corner, her eyes caught a handwritten label in faded red ink. Sweet Estate, confidential. Her heart skipped. She pulled the box down and set it on a nearby table. Dust flew into the air. Inside, carefully packed in tissue and sealed envelopes, were pieces of her forgotten life. The first thing she saw was a photograph, a candid shot of a man carrying a laughing child on his shoulders. The same man from the hallway photo. The child's head was thrown back, mouth open in joy. The sunlight danced in her dark hair. Elena brought the picture closer. The child wore a silver bracelet. Tucked beside the photo was a small cloth pouch. With shaking hands, she opened it. The bracelet was still there. Delicate. Silver. Engraved with 3 letters. ELS. Her full name, Elena Lorraine. Sweet. She gasped, her knees weakening. She sat on the floor, the bracelet in one hand, the photo in the other. Her chest tightened as if her heart remembered more than her mind ever could. There was more. She pulled out a sealed envelope marked private, to be opened only if something happens to me. It was addressed by Charles Sweet, her father. She tore it open with care, her fingers trembling. The letter inside was short but full of emotion. To whoever finds this, if anything happens to me and my wife, please protect our daughter, Elena. She is the future of this company. She is our life. Her bracelet is proof. Her name is on every legal file we've stored here. Don't let them forget her. Don't let them erase her. Charles' sweet tears blurred her vision. The world had called her nobody. The staff had mocked her, shamed her, shaved her head like a joke. But this was truth in ink, in silver, in blood. She was the missing daughter. She had been right all along. The photos, the bracelet, the letter, they weren't just memories. They were proof. She returned to the box, digging deeper. Inside were legal files, papers naming her as the legal heir, records of her birth, family photos. her baby footprints. She clutched the bracelet to her chest and sat still in the quiet, letting the weight of it all sink in. So many years had been stolen. So much of her childhood was buried under false names and silence. And yet here she was, still standing, still alive, still Elena. Her memories were no longer just dreams. They were real. She stayed in that room for hours, reading every word, touching every photo, memorizing every detail. Not just to remember, but to prepare. Because now she knew the truth, and truth has power. She wasn't going to stay quiet anymore, not for the trustees. Not for the liars, not for anyone who tried to erase her. They thought they had buried the sweet name, but the girl they left behind had found her way back, through second-hand coats and smudged windows and dusty files. She looked around the room one last time, then rose to her feet, bracelet on her wrist. She didn't wipe her tears. She let them fall. They weren't tears of pain anymore. They were fuel. She had the key to the past. Now she needed to unlock her future. Elena didn't rush. After everything she found in the archives, the photos, the letter, the bracelet, she knew the truth in her heart. But she also knew the world wouldn't believe a mop girl with a story. She needed proof they couldn't deny. So, the next morning, while no one was watching, Elena slipped into the main hallway and stood before the company's framed photo of the Sweet family. She carefully pulled a single hair from the frame, one left clinging to the inside edge of the glass, likely from when the portrait had been restored years ago. She tucked it inside a clean envelope and placed it safely in her bag. That afternoon, she visited a private clinic across town. No one there asked questions. She filled out the form, submitted her own sample, and paid in cash. Then she waited. 3 days passed slowly. She worked her shifts like normal, sweeping conference rooms and scrubbing bathrooms. No one knew what she was planning. The staff still laughed behind her back, whispered about her half-shaved head, and rolled their eyes when she walked by. She stayed quiet, still, watching, and finally, the results came. She opened the envelope alone, standing, in the break room late at night. The building was empty except for her and the silence. She held the paper with both hands, barely breathing. DNA. Result 99.9% match. Subject identified as Elena Lorraine Sweet, biological child of Charles and Isabella Sweet. Her hands began to shake. She dropped into the nearest chair, holding the results to her chest. It was done. It was real. There was no longer any doubt. She was Elena Sweet, the lost daughter. The missing heir, the one they thought had vanished. The company, the name, the legacy, all of it belonged to her. But she didn't run upstairs and shout it. Not yet. She knew now that the people in charge, the trustees, the managers, the board, members, were the same ones who had benefited from her family's disappearance. They hadn't searched. They hadn't waited. They had taken control and grown rich from what wasn't theirs. So she let them keep talking. She let them walk right past her without knowing they were stepping around the future owner of the building. She started paying closer attention. She watched, as Jordan, the smug manager, lied on reports. She noticed how expenses were signed off without approval. She saw who flirted with power, who stole supplies, who treated the office like their playground. She began writing everything down, dates, names, patterns. She copied files when no one was looking, took photos of shady meetings, collected witness, accounts from other interns who had also been bullied. She became invisible, not out of fear, but strategy. Let them laugh. Let them gloat. Let them dig. They didn't know that the floor they walked on was about to drop from under them. Every cruel word, every careless act, every cover-up. She saw it all. One by one, she placed it all into a folder labeled Return of I. The Heir. She no longer felt shame, no longer flinched at their voices. She walked the halls with purpose now, even if no one noticed yet, because she knew something they didn't. She wasn't just the girl they mocked. The girl they mocked now owned the ground they stood on. It was a Thursday morning when the invitation went out. Everyone at Sweet Enterprises received it at once. A company-wide meeting scheduled for Friday afternoon, called under the name of Interim CEO Gerald Knox, one of the original trustees. No one questioned it. Gerald's assistant assumed he had scheduled it himself. The board assumed it was a financial update. The staff expected another boring presentation on sales targets. No one knew that the real author of that email was Elena. She had used the legal access buried deep in the archive documents, the clause naming her the rightful heir, giving her full authority over internal operations. All she needed was the right moment, and now it had arrived. By 2 p.m. Friday, the top-floor boardroom was packed. Department heads, senior staff, assistants, and even janitorial supervisors stood along the back walls. Jordan sat near the front, chewing gum and scrolling his phone. The trustees, including Gerald, were seated at the long conference table, casually sipping coffee. Some of them chatted about golf. None of them noticed the small AV cart tucked into the corner. Then the lights dimmed, the screen flickered to life, and the doors shut behind them. All eyes turned as a single figure walked in from the side entrance. Elena. Her head was still half-shaved, the other half tucked behind her ear. She wore her blue cleaning uniform. No makeup, no heels, no fancy bag. Just herself and everything they had tried to bury. She didn't say a word. She simply stepped forward, picked up the remote, and clicked the first slide. The screen showed two photos side by side. On the left, the famous image of the Sweet family on. The right, a still image of Elena standing beside the hallway portrait, hand pressed to the glass. Same mole, same eyes, same crooked smile. There were murmurs. Jordan leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Slide 2 appeared. A copy of the DNA test is highlighted in yellow. 99.9% match, Elena Lorraine Sweet. Slide 3, the photo of the bracelet, engraved with ELS Slide 4, a scan of her birth certificate. Slide 5, the handwritten letter from Charles Sweet. Slide 6, a video began playing. A recorded statement from the original Sweet family lawyer, filmed just days after the plane crash. If Elena is ever found alive, she is to inherit full control of the company. No decision made in her absence is to override her blood right. Silence fell over the room. Elena stood still, eyes scanning the crowd. She saw confusion on the interns, panic in the assistants, shock in the newer managers. But the board, they weren't shocked. They were still, too still. And that's when she saw it. They knew. The trustees, Gerald, Margot, and Lane, didn't react. No gasps, no disbelief, just tight jaws and eyes avoiding hers. They had known all along. They'd found traces, maybe a lead or two over the years. But instead of announcing it, they had buried it, profited from it, erased her existence to protect their control. Her photo in the hallway hadn't been forgotten. It had been hidden in plain sight, as a trophy, as a warning. They had known. The silence stretched too long. Finally, Gerald spoke. "Miss, whatever this is, I'm sure we can discuss it privately." But his voice wavered. Elena stepped forward. She placed a thick file on the table. Payroll fraud, insider deals, ghost employees. 10 years of theft under your management, she said calmly. Gasps rippled across the room. Cross-referenced with emails, account statements, and meeting logs, she continued, opening the folder. Signed off by every person in this room who called. Me, worthless. Jordan stood up, suddenly pale. You can't be serious. I am, Elena interrupted. Because you all made sure I would never forget how serious you were when you laughed, when you shaved my head, when you threw me away." She turned. "Toward the trustees. You buried the heir, but I came back with a shovel." Security entered the room, summoned by the silent alarm she had triggered before starting. Elena nodded. Officers stepped forward. Gerald, Margot, and Lane read their rights as panic spread across the boardroom. Jordan backed against the wall, mumbling. Excuses, sweat pouring from his brow. Nobody laughed now. Elena stood quietly as they were taken out. The screen behind her faded to black. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just looked around the room at every person who had looked through her, stepped over her, spoken down to her. She wasn't asking for their respect. She was showing them the truth. One person began clapping, then another. A slow, unsure ripple of applause that spread like a wave. It wasn't loud, it wasn't fake, it was stunned and real. Elena walked out without another word. She didn't need a speech. The evidence had spoken for her, and her silence had been louder than anything they ever said. What began as humiliation became a revolution. The fall came faster than anyone expected. Within hours of the boardroom meeting, the story was already making headlines across Iowa. Missing sweet heiress returns, trustees arrested in fraud scandal. Photos from the meeting leaked online. Elena standing calmly in her cleaning uniform, security walking the former CEO out in handcuffs. The very next day, government officials arrived with a full audit team. They swept through every floor of Sweet Enterprises. Boxes of financial documents were taken, hard drives seized, emails pulled from years back. What they found shocked even the investigators. Under Gerald and the board's management, millions had disappeared. Fake vendors, duplicate salaries, lavish personal trips hidden under fake budgets. Every stolen dollar had come from the legacy Elena's parents had built, and she had the records to prove it. The legal fallout was swift. Gerald, Margot, and Lane were formally charged. Their bail was denied. But the public wanted more. They wanted to see the others. The ones who mocked, the ones who humiliated, the ones who helped cover it all up, face consequences too. That morning, in front of nearly every employee, Elena called a final staff meeting. This time, she walked in wearing something different, a clean sky blue dress, the same shade she wore in the old family photo as a child. Her head was still healing from the forced haircut, but she didn't hide it. She didn't need to. She stood tall, calm, and composed, her presence undeniable. Everyone went quiet. Jordan sat near the back, pale and fidgeting. He didn't smirk this time. He barely met her eyes. Elena looked around the room, letting the silence speak before she did. "I'm not here for revenge," she said. "I'm here for justice." One by one, she read the names of those directly involved in fraud, bullying, or abuse of power. Those who laughed the loudest when she was hurt. Those who used her pain as entertainment. Jordan was the first. "You're fired," she said without emotion. Security was already waiting. As he stood trying to speak, his voice cracked. I didn't mean..." But it was too late. The cameras were on him. His fall was public, permanent. More names followed. Elena didn't raise her voice. She didn't curse or cry. She simply removed the poison from the heart of the company. Some employees cried. Some begged for second chances. Some sat frozen, faces white with guilt. Elena didn't react. She didn't need to. She had already survived more than any of them could imagine. But she didn't fire everyone, not even close. Those who had stayed silent but never cruel, those who had done their jobs and kept their distance, she kept. She knew fear made people small, and not everyone was rotten. She wasn't building a kingdom of vengeance. She was rebuilding her family's name. After the meeting, Elena walked the hall once more, passing the old spaces she used to clean. The glass she once wiped now reflected her from a new angle. Not a ghost, not a servant, a leader. Employees bowed their heads as she passed, not out of fear, but respect. She walked with grace, with pride, with a quiet strength that came from surviving. At the end of the corridor, she paused at a large window overlooking the city. The sky was soft and clear, like it had been the morning her life changed, a new beginning, lit by the same sun. That night, as news stations played her story on every screen, people across the country saw not just a headline, but a lesson. The girl they threw away had come back stronger. A child they erased had returned with her name in stone, and the ones who pretended to lead, they were gone. What they destroyed made her rise. Weeks passed. The building was quieter now, not from fear, but from change. The air inside Sweet Enterprises felt different, like something had shifted beneath the surface, letting the truth breathe. Elena now had an office at the top floor, a corner one. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Des Moines, catching sunlight in long golden rays. But today, her office was being repainted, a soft ivory white with deep navy accents, the colors her mother once loved. So, while painters worked behind her, Elena took a walk down the hallway she used to clean every morning. The hallway was where everything had started, the hallway where the portrait had hung. She slowed her steps as she neared the spot. The frame was still there, but now it leaned gently against the wall. The photo of the Sweet family had been taken down. The glass had been polished one final time. Elena stood in front of it, eyes tracing every detail of the image she'd once stared at with longing. There was her father, Charles, tall and smiling, his hand resting on her mother's shoulder. Isabella, calm and graceful, her eyes full of quiet joy. And in the center, the little girl with the bright blue dress, captured mid-laugh. For so long, that girl felt like a stranger, a mystery. But now she knew her. She was her. Elena knelt down and gently lifted the frame. She didn't need help. This was something she needed to do on her own. With slow, steady hands, she removed the photo from its frame. Then she reached into a sleek black case she had brought with her. Inside was a new portrait, one taken just last week. Elena stood at the center in a fitted navy blue suit, her hair grown back to her shoulders. Beside her, in soft black and white overlays, were her parents, added digitally, using the last family photo ever taken. The three of them stood together again, as they should have been. She placed the new image inside the frame and locked it into place. Then, she reached for the small gold plaque. The old one read, "Sweet Family, missing since years." She replaced it with a new plaque that read, "Sweet Bloodline, restored." As she stepped back, a silence filled the hallway. Not the silence of isolation she once knew. This was different. It was peaceful, complete. A few employees stood nearby, quietly watching from a distance. None of them said a word. One woman placed a hand over her heart. A man lowered his head, not out of guilt, not out of fear, but out of respect. Elena turned, her eyes calm, and she had a small smile on her lips. She didn't feel broken anymore. She didn't feel like a girl from a foster home with torn shoes and silence in her throat. She felt whole, rooted, ready. The walls she once scrubbed now held her story. The office that once ignored her now followed her lead. She walked down the hall, the same hall that had once echoed with cruel laughter, and all she heard now was the soft rhythm of her heels, steady and sure. Every door she passed opened slightly. Not to spy, not to mock, just to watch, just to see her walk by. Some nodded, some whispered her name. Elena. Elena Sweet. She nodded in return, her expression calm, graceful but unshakable. And as she reached the end of the hallway, she paused at the elevator and looked out across the floor. This place had once made her feel invisible. Now, her presence lit every corner. The girl they thought was nobody, was now the name on every paycheck, the owner of every desk, the story behind every change, and she had done it not with revenge, but with truth, not with anger, but with strength. The little girl in the photo was never lost, just waiting, and now she had found her way back, not to the building, but to herself. As the elevator doors opened, she stepped inside without looking back, because she didn't need to. The photo was on the wall. The truth was no longer a secret, and justice had been served. They tried to erase her identity, but she returned to sign every paycheck with her name.